Hello, adventurer. It's good to see you. You have made it to the morning grind.
Welcome, welcome.
It's the live stream at the beginning of the Geekverse, where we talk about all types of topics in geekdom, gaming, and fantasy, with an emphasis on being constructive and creating the things that we want to exist in the world.
It's all on the grind, Sizemore. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of adventures to be had today. Dungeons to explore and monsters to slay, and who knows what a random encounter might send our way. That's why we have to prepare, so settle in now for the morning grind with your favorite beverage in hand.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left.
Whatever you want. Pull up a chair.
Dude.
If you're feeling fancy, how about a cappuccino? Or a frappuccino? Or how about an espresso?
Just tea, thank you.
Sounds good to me, Gandalf. Whatever you want. I'm just glad you're here.
Everyone is welcome. You can just watch if you want. You don't have to worship anything you don't want to worship.
Thank you, Mike. But be forewarned.
Sometimes we get really strange characters around here.
Wait, what's that you say? Why can't you come and be a part of the stream?
My wife would disown me.
Oh no, I bet she'll be fine with it. Come on in.
Am I scared for my safety? No.
What are we supposed to do?
Everybody do the secret handshake.
Secret cultist handshake.
Oh, now do wizards who love each other.
This, my friend, is a science.
I still don't have gifts, but it's fine.
It's all on the grind, son. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
Dude, this would be a sick place to bring the band.
Indeed it would be, Dave. It really would. I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. Glad to have you here. Oh, look, here's someone new.
Is this the cultist meetup?
Yes it is.
Come to hang out? Please accept me. I have nothing else.
Okay, we accept you. Everyone's welcome here.
Brought some snacks.
Well, that makes things even better.
You want some coffee? I don't drink coffee. You sure? It's cultist coffee. What makes it cultist coffee? I'm a cultist and I'm drinking it. Oh. Then I'll have some.
What exactly is going on here?
I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. It's so great to have you. Oh, and look, here comes another stranger.
Can we help you?
Yes, fellow cultists. I could really use some food.
Oh yeah? Welcome. We have donuts.
Oh, it's me. I'm glad I'm here. I'm sure you have a few questions for me, though.
What's your name? Who do you work for? What god do you worship?
Great questions, Rob.
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
No, not really. I'm just Heath, and I won't be worshiping anything this morning. But I will be your host. Welcome to the office. We're going to have a great time. I've got my coffee ready, because now it's time for the morning grind.
If you could become a fish, that would be amazing. Then I could command you with my mental fish powers.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you doing? It's good to see you again this morning, even though I know you can't see me. There was something wrong with the camera today. I think there's just some kind of thing's been disconnected or something. My desk here is an absolute disaster. I have not been getting any cleaning done. And so I think something got bumped or disconnected or something, and I just have to figure it out later when I'm trying to clean stuff later. Got to get it running because tonight we are doing Fight Club tonight at 7:00 p.m. on the Table Talk channel. Let me go ahead and copy this link. Table Talk will be over here at Fight Club. Actually, Brianna's not going to be able to make it tonight. She told me yesterday. So if you want to talk about Fight Club, which, yes, I know is something you're not supposed to do, Doug and I are going to be talking about Fight Club tonight. I rewatched it yesterday, took notes, been getting into different people's discussions of themes and everything about that, and have some more stuff to do on that this afternoon in preparation for tonight's discussion. Even though Brianna and I are going to be working very hard this afternoon and tomorrow afternoon to get a bunch of stuff done on the channels. But but we have to talk about it. I know. So tonight, 7 o'clock, Brianna won't be here, but Doug and me, we will be talking about Fight Club tonight. But then also this morning, let's see here. This is the final day, last 10 hours of the Trial of St. Gabriel campaign. I set this up so that it will end during the live stream tonight for Fight Club. So it will end tonight, 10 hours from now. So we'll be able to count down live on Table Talk tonight. And then I will get this out to everyone. It is my dark short story of the Christmas Massacre. It is not something, it addresses Christmas in a way that I don't see it addressed very often. Specifically, a major part of it is Herod's massacre of the innocents. And I wanted to write a story where if you took that seriously, massacre of the innocents, since it is part of the story, and maybe it shouldn't be. We talked about that when we were discussing the Christmas story on Table Talk. But since it is there, and if you want to take it seriously, what kind of lesson, what type of story do you tell where you end up with a massacre? And so I put the link in the chat. Let me drop that in again now that we're live. So if you would like to be a part of that, come on in, and then we'll get those out, and then we'll be moving on. But I'm really excited. Because I was like, I have been trying to get a Christmas story out for years and years, and so I finally sat down and made it happen. So Christmas story, the Trial of St. Gabriel. Christmas like you've never seen it before. Good morning, BGD. Good morning. Good morning, Brent and James. Let's see. Lynn, we've got Lynn here. Phaser Wrist is with us here this morning, and so is Charlie. Good morning. Good morning. So let's see. Zero the Blade is here as well. So let's see. Making up thumbnails will be one of the things that we do this afternoon. I believe it is Thursday. We got two guests coming up on Table Talk that are scheduled. So one of them is Roll of Law. So you guys had been asking to talk to Roll of Law because we had been talking about the licensing situation between the elf and the orc. Well, we were scheduling him yesterday, and so that should be, so he's Thursday, right? We've got I think that he is on the 14th, and then RPG by DBJ, which is who is a tabletop game designer. We frequently see him in the comments here. Not as often as we should like, but we often see him here, and he does his own live streams on world building. And we're going to be talking about storytelling RPGs, and specifically, I believe, the impact of death, and that'll be the week after that. So we've got two guests coming up, Roll of Law, and then RPG by DBJ. So that's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so that's what's going on right now, and then there's going to be more going on after the Trial of St. Gabriel closes. Let me take this down, and let's go ahead and do our morning sacrament this morning. If you're just coming in, yes, I know my camera's been disconnected or something. That's why I don't have the camera on. I'll have to figure it out this afternoon. Okay, so here is Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. So everybody got your drink? I do have my drink this morning. I've got coffee. So here we go. Let's take 2 deep breaths, complete inhales, complete exhales, and then take a sip of your favorite beverage this morning. So here we go. And sip. There we go. Hopefully you did it with me. It'll be an important part of your morning. So last time we were actually talking about, what an uplifting kind of conversation we were having with this part of Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield, talking about pulling the pin, which we don't want to do. We don't want to pull the pin. We want to get stuck in with whatever it is that we're trying to create, and then make it happen, follow through. So this is Pulling the Pin, part 2. Two things struck me about the migrants in the bunkhouse. First, they were wonderful guys. They weren't crazy. They weren't stupid. They would teach you and help you. They'd share anything down to their last dollar. They were funny and smart. Many of them were readers. A good portion kept up with politics and had more insight to contribute than paid pundits on the airwaves. Second, they had achieved this kind of peace that comes when you've already fallen so far that you don't have to worry about falling any further. Worst comes to worst, Dave or Jack could have slept on the ground, foraged for grub. If the bomb went off tomorrow, they'd survive just fine. There was something very natural, I thought, about a life following the seasons. The human race did that for millions of years. When the season finished in Washington, the next crop was coming in to harvest down in California. Are you coming for the cherries? Dave asked me. I wanted to. If I hadn't had a book I had to finish so I could stop pulling the pin and had my cat, Mo, to look after, I'd have done it. I gave Dave a ride to the highway. I could see him in my rear view with his thumb out, heading south as I was going west. The kind of life we call normal isn't normal at all. A spouse and kids, a mortgage, 9 to 5. Who said that was life? That's a great, what's so great about working a factory or a cubicle? You and I, who are artists and entrepreneurs, live a life that's closer to natural, if you ask me. We migrate too. We follow the muse instead of the sun. When one crop is picked, we hit the road and move on to the next. It's not a bad life. It's lonely. It's tough. It ain't for everyone. But like the life of a migrant on the road, it has its compensations. Dave may have been a drinker, and he certainly wasn't going to quit, but that was the life he had chosen. Would his mother and father, his sisters and his ex-wife have picked this kind of life for him? Would he himself have elected it? But Dave was willing to pay the price for the choices he had made. He paid it in hard work and hard times, and the looks people gave him when he passed on the street. They didn't know Dave. He was a top hand and a good guy. He would never pull the pin. He was a pro. James says, exciting guests. I am glad that you like them. I hope that everyone really enjoys them. And then, by the way, talking about Star Trek, that means, see, Doug and I were going to do Star Trek 6 this evening, but then Brianna wanted to swap up. So we swapped the dates for the Brianna. And then yesterday, Brianna found out she's not going to be able to make it tonight anyway. So we've got Star Trek 6. So Star Trek 6 should be next Tuesday. So it should be Role of Law, then Star Trek 6, then RPG with DBJ. Good morning, Nathaniel. This sounds like something we need to look into. Did I see that Hasbro is in big financial trouble? I wonder how it'll affect HeroQuest. No, I did not see that. In fact, I think I've got some HeroQuest expansions that are due in. Hasbro, what's going on in the news? I just look for Hasbro and Google News. That's HeroQuest and Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, this was 17 hours ago. Hasbro lays. No, well, this is from Yahoo Finances. Says Hasbro lays off nearly 20% of its workers. This is the Washington Post. Hang on, I'll take this down. I don't know, we'll pull that back up in just a second. Hasbro to lay off 1,100 employees as toy sales slump. Hasbro, the toy maker behind games such as Monopoly and Transformer action figures, will lay off about 1,100 employees globally due to stronger than expected market headwinds. Chief Executive Chris Cox told staff Monday in a memo. The move comes on the back of 5 consecutive quarters of declining revenue for Hasbro, the most recent of which is reported in October. For many toy makers, sales are slowing down after a boom during the coronavirus pandemic, when Hasbro and rivals such as Mattel and Lego reported strong sales as consumers sought out old-school toys and games. We anticipated the first 3 quarters to be challenging, particularly in the division of toys, where the market is coming off historic pandemic-driven highs, Cox says. But the headwinds we thought for the first 9 months of the year are likely to persist in 2024. The company announced in January that it would slash 15% of its workforce in a bid to yield up to $300 million in savings by the end of 2025. To further cut costs, Hasbro is exiting its office in Providence, Rhode Island, which is currently not being used to full capacity. Huh. No, thank you for bringing that up. I had not seen that. It'd be interesting to see what that means for all of their gaming divisions. I thought we would take a look at the Fate Horror Toolkit today. For some reason, we'd never looked at this one. So figure out what horror is and how to represent it in this game. Drudenfuzz says, looking forward to DBJ to be on one of your channels. Yeah, it's going to be great. I think we're going to have a great conversation. Oh, and BGD is looking forward to tonight. Yeah, we'll have to see. James says, yeah, I would imagine that Magic the Gathering is still a major anchor, I would guess. When all is said and done, Hasbro is going to end up as Magic the Gathering, the company, with a ton of mothballed IP they never use except to cross them with Magic. All right, let's see what's going on with the horror toolkit here. Has anybody played with this one? We had looked specifically at the Cthulhu RPG that Fate did. And but I don't think we'd ever looked at the horror toolkit. And when I think about storytelling and RPGs, which has been a topic that's been kind of come up in a couple of ways lately, and I'm sure it will come up when I talk to DBJ. Lou Anders, who I've interviewed, was a big fan of Fate as a storyteller's RPG. If you're trying to tell a story, Lou was saying, and I think it's a great insight, that often stories play out in the way that Fate does, rather than in a way that Dungeons and Dragons does. The Fate mechanics with the Fate points, and then taking disadvantages, having things complicate the story, and then cashing in those advantages right there at the end, or throughout the story. But like when you're fighting the big bad guy, rather than wearing down a whole bunch of hit points, have complications that then manifest and that you cash in, and you're able to take out the bad guy instead of wearing away his hit points. I think it's a great observation. So Lou and I talked about that, and Lou's discussion on that is up on Table Talk. Something lurks in the shadows. Maybe it's a masked killer or a creature from so I was saying, so that's why Lou always was recommending that storytellers play RPGs, and the RPG that he recommended was Fate for this reason. If you're just coming in, yeah, my camera's unhooked or something like that, I've got to figure out what's up. So I'm audio only. Robert says, it was a likely outcome because of the inflation we've been experiencing, if for no other reason. The business practices likely didn't help, including the OGL crisis, but RPGs are only a fraction of their business. Maybe it's a masked killer, or a creature from the unknown depths, or a psychotic porcelain doll, or maybe it's just a cat and the threat stands right behind you. The Fate Horror Toolkit offers a variety of tools, mechanics, and hacks to help you develop thematic horror in your game. Explore what horror is and how to employ it effectively at your table. Learn how to develop horror elements in Fate, a game system designed around competent, proactive characters not usually seen in horror. Pick up a variety. Oh, that's interesting, because I do like that Fate is about competent, proactive characters. I like the way that they describe their characters in Fate, that you need to actually do something. Of course, characters and stories are better when they do something. So RPG characters are also better when they actually do something. Can't just sit forever in your workshop as a wizard brewing potions. And that's why we talk about alchemists being a very difficult kind of character concept to bring into an RPG. So learn how to develop horrific elements in a game system designed around competent, proactive characters, but this is not usually seen in horror. Pick up a variety of mechanics to easily design your own game about the things that go bump in the night. The Fate Horror Toolkit is a Fate core supplement. This toolkit includes extensive tools to make scary and effective horror adversaries when running Fate games, where doom is inevitable. Modified and thematic compels designed to help up the suspense and visceral horror elements of your games. A variety of new aspect types, such as legacy and intensity aspects, help develop thematic horror elements and define boundaries. A campaign framework for running horror stories based on teamwork, particularly good for younger audiences. Fate toolkits, all the tools to build your stage. I was writing a new short story in Rabivania, working on that this morning too, talking about for a younger audience. Of course, I ended up where I typically go, which was a violent end. I'm going to have to rewrite this so that my main character becomes a bit less homicidal. So I'm interested to know what it says for younger audiences here. Because my initial instincts don't always work. Oh, really? Oh, so Hasbro defines core brands as anything pulling over a certain dollar amount, whatever that is. I forget the actual number. It's literally the only thing is Magic the Gathering. Now, Phaser Risk says HQ needs an alchemist hero, someone who specializes in potion bombs and boosts. That would be fun to complement. So often the way that people do alchemists is have them be grenadiers, so they could probably do that. Although I noticed in one of the new expansions, you can actually use the alchemist bench to brew things, to brew different potions. I'm not a big fan of alchemist as grenadier, but so I prefer them being more like the scientist types. But that doesn't give them a good reason to adventure. They're kind of stuck at home. Contents: the Fate Toolkit series. Chapter 1 is analyzing into the abyss, gazing into the abyss. Chapter 2 is the raveled sleeve of care. Chapter 3 is some scars are invisible. Chapter 4 is who's who of the damned. Chapter 5 is we are all going to die. Sounds like 10 candles. Chapter 6, the high cost of living. 7, horror is the new pink. Chapter 8, spooky fun. And then some appendices right here. The anatomy of a horror game. And then how to use this book. Let's see what this says. Chapter 1, gazing into the abyss and the anatomy of a horror game. How do you invoke horror? Has anybody been successfully running great horror at the table? Adventure seems much easier. Gazing into the Abyss. Introduction and how to use this book. Many role-playing games are lightly spiced with disturbing or scary elements intended to thrill and entertain their players. Others draw on the rich tradition of horror fiction to pose awful moral dilemmas, offer existential threats at every turn, and tell stories saturated with tension and dread. Such games gaze into the abyss and challenge it to gaze back, if it dares. The anatomy of a horror game. The goal of the Fate Horror Toolkit is to give you the tools to run effective horror games in Fate Core. However, before we don our leather aprons and open our stained roll of sharp and terrifying instruments, let's review the vital parts of a successful horror game. Horror requires player investments. All horror requires investment from the audience. Movies and TV can get a head start on this by using music, lighting, jump scares, and other cues as shortcuts to the viewer's fight or flight response, while books have the luxury of a one-on-one relationship with the reader and plenty of time to get into their head. I've been thinking about that quite a bit recently after we just spoke with Maxwell Alexander Drake, goes by Drake on the Table Talk channel, and he was talking about specifically the difference between introducing things in different media. Like he was talking about not having the prologue of Star Wars, especially in the context of writing a book. And I've been thinking about that quite a bit over the past few days. The start on action, you can watch things blow up and you can watch a whole bunch of action on the screen, but maybe the slow builds are a bit better for novels. I think that was interesting. Drudenfuzz says, I love running horror games. That's what I do for 2 decades now. TSL Frontman says Drake is an eccentric guy, but has some great and unique wisdoms. Yes. Role-playing games don't have it so easy. They're an inherently social activity, making it much more difficult to achieve an atmosphere fully conducive to horror. You can use music and props to help build the mood, but without the enthusiastic cooperation and investment of your players, your efforts are doomed to failure. A successful horror game provides tools and advice that facilitate player investment in the horror themes of the game and minimizes distractions that make this harder to achieve. Horror is transgressive. The beating heart of horror is violation. Nothing and no one is safe, and the more important something is to the characters, the more likely it is to be corrupted, mutilated, or destroyed. Morals are tarnished and buckle under the weight of unspeakable dilemmas. People and things the character love betray them, or are twisted, broken, and torn apart. Horror is a crucible from which nothing emerges unscathed. Horror is isolating. Horror fiction systemically isolates its protagonists from anyone or anything that can help them, leaving them nobody to rely on but themselves. Sometimes it goes even further, eliminating the protagonists one at a time until the last survivor faces a desperate struggle to survive against insurmountable odds. In a horror game, the player characters find it difficult to persuade anyone to help them, or their helpers meet grisly fates. The existence of their adversaries is difficult to prove. At best, the authorities view the characters as confused or dishonest. At worst, they're seen as menaces to be handled accordingly. Presuming, of course, the authorities aren't already owned by the adversary. A game can be isolating without employing a high player character mortality rate, but if characters are expected to die regularly, such as when invoking Halloween-style slasher movie, the game needs to provide options for keeping players of dead characters involved and engaged in the game. Sounds like the death topic DBJ wants to talk about. Phaser Risk says, Tiny Dungeon is a fun little RPG too. I think it uses the Fate-esque mechanic too. I can't remember. I don't think we've looked at that one. James says, I love Call of Cthulhu. Outside of that, I haven't played many actual horror games. I've done Ravenloft, but I imagine that doesn't really count. I've never played Ravenloft. Now, I have played Call of Cthulhu, but we actually played the D20 version. I'm not exactly sure why. I guess that's just what we had. We played the D20 version. But that was an excellent example of when the rule system didn't really matter. We had a fantastic game master who put together a Call of Cthulhu game for us. And man, it was great. It absolutely was fantastic. One of my favorite gaming experiences, actually. Horror is disempowering. Horror is closely associated with feelings of hopelessness and despair. Without conflict, there would be no drama, but the conflicts of horror fiction are unfair and overwhelming. If the characters are frequently prepared and equipped to cope, it takes us away from horror and into thriller territory. Characters don't have to be incompetent, but they do have to be outmatched by horrendous adversaries, disempowered due to their circumstances or lack of appropriate knowledge, or have their coping tools stripped away from them over the course of the game. Failure is always a possibility, and sometimes doom is inevitable. In other cases, the characters are able to rally before the end of the story, gaining the tools and support they need to fight back and perhaps win the day. Horror thrives on uncertainty and suspense. Ignorance may be bliss, but its cousin uncertainty is surely not. While ignorance reflects absence of knowledge, uncertainty derives from partial knowledge and is the root of suspense, a state of anxious uncertainty about past, present, and future events. We're all familiar with the coercive effects of everyday suspense. Will I be a victim of the current round of layoffs? Is my partner having an affair? Is the shadow on my chest x-ray a tumor or a benign cyst? Horror turns suspense up to 11, often in a way that exaggeratedly reflects real-life fears. Why have my work colleagues been disappearing after they go to their performance reviews? Is my partner really my partner, or is he an identical replacement that's subtly wrong? Is the shadow on my chest x-ray? Did I just read that? Is the shadow on my chest X-ray a tumor or a horrifying thing? Oh, I see. I see what we're saying here. Turn this up to 11. Not just is the X-ray a tumor or benign cyst? Is this a thing that is slowly gnawing its way out of my body? I got thinking about something else. Phaser Risk says, Heath, have you read the 5-Room Dungeon book? It's a big book of that's full of 5 dungeons and the mechanics on how to design them. Yes, actually, we did look at the 5-Room Dungeon on the show. So there's a morning grind on looking at the 5-Room Dungeon. When we were looking at dungeon design, we did a series on that. And at least one day we were looking at the 5-Room Dungeon design and maybe one of its variants on another day. So if anybody's interested in that, if you look up 5-Room Dungeon and Morning Grind, I bet you'll find it. Should find it. It's here on the channel somewhere. Because we were looking for ways, basically, in that sense, we were looking for a structure for an adventure, and specifically a dungeon, although you could generalize the 5-Room Dungeon to other types of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be a literal dungeon. But we were looking for a structure for adventure design and crawling, and maybe dungeon crawling, specifically for like one-shots. I think that's what we were thinking about at the time. That's something that I'd like to get back to. I'm working through projects one at a time, but I'd like to get back to that. James says, for some reason, the Call of Cthulhu system just really clicks for me, and the atmosphere has always been right up my alley. Is this bad or fine? Verse, is this bad or worse? Yes. Wait, what is the Candela? Has anyone heard the more recent review? I thought it said news. Has anyone heard the more recent reviews on Candela Obscura? Not looking too good. No, I have not actually been back to look at Candela Obscura. What are people saying about that? I just saw it actually when I was looking through my PDF collection over here. Today, I saw Candela Obscura, and of course, we did look at that on the show, on the Morning Grind. But that's different from Daggerhearts. I looked up Daggerheart this morning right before this show. I was like, hey, wait a minute. Should we be looking at Daggerheart this morning? But you have to sign up for the beta over there, right? Which I am not signed up for. So I don't have Daggerheart. I don't have any type of I don't have anything about the MCDM game other than what we saw out on BackerKit. And I don't know anything about DC-20 either. Phaser Risk says, another great book is The Adventure Crafter by Tanya Pigeon. It's good for adventure design as well as for writers. It has tons of possibilities. I'm going to look that one up. I have not ever heard of that one. The Adventure Crafter. Oh, it's on Drive-Thru RPG. Create adventure outlines, seeds, events, and complete narratives. I have not permanently lost, but I have temporarily misplaced my big list of morning grind topics to try to get back to. I'm transitioning. We did about 200 episodes or more on games, and then I kind of had to take a break. So I kind of went to some other topics too. But I want to get back to games because we're be talking about some games with the Cultist show coming up. So I'm transitioning kind of back to that. I'll just put it over here. So let me make note of this. The Adventure Crafter. It does sound like it hits both our interest in games and storytelling. TS, I believe this is regarding Candela Obscura. I've heard it's decent, but not what people were expecting. Rather niche. Black Lodge Games, an Indestructible review, led the system a few days ago. Black Lodge goes very hard, but they agree with Indestructible in general. Well, what did Indestructible say? He said review led the system. So he was against it or didn't think it was that great? Let's see. Effective horror games give enough information for the players for them to be anxious without giving everything away at once, because suspense relies heavily on ambiguity and partial information. Okay. So if you were thinking about this book, how do we use this book and what does this book mean? Our Bloody Instruments, How to Use This Book. Each of the following chapters of this book provides a horror tools grouped around a specific theme. Chapter 2, The Raveled Sleeve of Care, tools for encouraging players to invest in the game and care about what happens to their characters and NPCs. Chapter 3, Some Scars Are Invisible, tools for sensitively portraying the long-term psychological effects of horror situations in your games. Chapter 4, Who's Who of the Damned, tools for making scary, effective horror adversaries from monsters to more abstract threats. Chapter 5, Are We All Going to Die? Tools for running games where doom is inevitable. Chapter 6, The High Cost of Living, a campaign framework for stories where the group's survival and the price they pay for it is the focus of the horror. Chapter 7, The Horror is the New Pink. Horror is the New Pink, a campaign framework for exploring the subversion of supposedly safe spaces and other forms of horror that primarily pertain to the feminine experience. Sounds like the Heroine's Labyrinth. I wonder, running the Heroine's Labyrinth, what it has to say about horror. Doug was saying that the Heroine's Labyrinth often comes up in horror, which, I think, by the way, that Doug submitted his final copy of that book. It'll be coming out next year, early next year, first quarter next year. So I think he actually submitted what was going to be his the absolute final version. Chapter 8, Spooky Fun, a campaign framework for running horror stories for younger audiences that encourages the players to work as a team. Show the kids that monsters can be defeated. I'm curious about that. I want to know what it has to say about that. There are tools in each chapter that are relevant to any horror game, not just the specific frameworks we present here. You can also build on the common themes of the tools we're developing to create your own tools. Themed or modified fate points, communal fate point pool or monster pool, modified or thematic compels, enhanced self-compels, visceral compels, climatic dilemmas, declaring story details, themed aspects, modified concessions, modified skills and approaches, conditions, coping conditions. Let's see, conditions in the Fate Horror Toolkit. In several places in this book, we've used conditions as defined on page 116 of Dresden Files Accelerated. If you don't have access to Dresden Files Accelerated, you can refer to the rules for conditions on page 18 of the Fate System Toolkit or at the web link. The main difference is the Dresden Files Accelerated condition is not an aspect unless the text specifically says. Phaser Wrist says, I've been tinkering with combining HQ and Against Darkness, treating all the heroes as one party and combining their attack and defense rolls a la 4 AD. It was fun when I tried. 4 Against Darkness. I don't know that one. I've been thinking, I didn't get to play Hero Quest like I wanted to last weekend. We're going to play with the nephews after Christmas. But I really want to pay attention to potential modifications to Hero Quest. Who are playing, like, how would I change this game up? We talked about that. We talked about the difference between it and Dragon Strike on this channel before, on the show before. But, that's not a long rule book. You should be able to sit down and create something like that. Like, if I were going to change up Hero Quest specifically for the purposes of playing with my nephews, what would I do? Okay, so which one of these topics is most interesting for us to look at? I want to look at the one about the chapter 8, but I'll do that later. Let's see. So chapter 2, The Raveled Sleeve of Care, Media Inspiration, Game Creation, Character Creation During Play. Chapter 3, Some Scars Are Invisible, Media Inspiration, Tools of the Trade, Wounds Lead to Scars. That sounds like Stomping Kittens. Trauma aspects, coping conditions, other mental illness, the horror of viscera and gore. All right, let's look at that one. Fate Core provides a system for mental conflicts and the potentially lasting consequences that can result from them. The tools we provide here are designed to supplement the standard mental conflict rules in handling the long-term mental toll of horror on the characters. Media inspiration. The following books, movies, and TV shows are useful sources of inspiration when considering the mental toll of horror. The Orphanage is an excellent movie that speaks to the extremes of what grief can drive people. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, along with several of the other works, focuses on the repercussions of guilt and shame. Jezebel is a Southern Gothic movie about recovering from extreme injury while in your childhood home. Yeah, I know. Well, I think I just recreate the monk. Actually, I did notice that, I think the monk needs to be toned down. Somebody commented on the unboxing video. Let's see, what did he say? It was something like, let's see if I can find this comment. Oh, okay. So, Octopugilist said on the monk, just got the minis and started painting them. Only gripe with the woman's facial features are too soft, like the elf. You can't really speed paint her face. Took me 5 tries to get something good enough. The male's muscles are begging for some freehand Japanese-style tattoos. He says, I haven't play tested, but everything I've heard says the monk is very fragile in combat and doesn't really have any potential for upgrades, which is not something that I thought about. What can the monk use? So this person is saying that people are saying the monk doesn't have great upgrades. So while they're really strong early in the game, it's a challenge to keep them alive later on. They have no healing spells either. All in all, this person says better balance than the warlock, and I don't have the warlock. Oh, hey, Sable Phoenix. I'm very sorry to hear that. Hope you're all right. Glad you're back. 10 Cloverfield Lane depicts the consequences of isolation and uncertainty on the human psyche. The Road by Cormac McCarthy is a novel exploring the twin hopes and fears of driving the characters to survive in a bleak post-apocalyptic world. I Am Legend by Richard Matheson is a classic about a man surviving alone and surrounded by vampires who come to realize he's become a monster to the monsters. The Shining, Alien, Child of Fire, Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Chainsaw Massacre. So representing mental health issues at the table is something you must handle sensitively and respectfully. The possibility of causing distress to a player by mistreating the subject is very real, and so is the risk of reinforcing prejudice against and misunderstanding of people with mental health issues. The issues of player consent and safety we discussed earlier, page 7, are of paramount importance when you're going to explore the subject of mental health. So before discussing specific rules, let's briefly review the general tools you have at your disposal as the GM to make psychological trauma a viable and non-harmful character arc at the game. Metagaming is the practice of considering the game as a whole, including rule books, character sheets, and other materials, rather than relying entirely on in-game experiences. While often derided as ruining a game, metagaming is an excellent tool for discussing choices prior to their occurrence. Let's skip through here a little bit. Wounds lead to scars. Okay. Horror fiction is powered by the things we fear. Commonly, we fear the things that can happen or be done to us or to our friends and families. We can experience a trauma and thus acquire mental health issues that we didn't have before. As explored in Body Horror, page 65, we can lose a limb, sight, or hearing in a horrifying way, and mental consequences can result. There may also be mental consequences for seeing something awful, as described in Visceral Horror, page 45. Dealing with grief. Bereavement is a particularly potent source of mental harm. Loss is something we must all deal with in our real lives, and in the horror game, PCs and NPCs are likely to die on a regular basis. How characters respond to the loss of a close friend, mentor, or collaborator is a worthwhile place to explore psychological trauma. If you've ever experienced a death of a family member or a friend, you probably remember what that felt like, but there are many other ways to grieve. Characters who live with addictions might indulge in those habits more than they regularly do if it's as a reaction to death. Others may go totally numb, protecting themselves from their actual feelings by pretending that nothing is wrong, right up until the point where it goes very wrong. Still, others react with anger. Grief is an emotional and physical response to death. Some people feel physically ill upon hearing they've lost someone, and it's not a psychosomatic response. Others can't stop crying, no matter how hard they try. Grief can be about more than just death as well. Loss of a friendship, a loss of a pet, or any other kind of traumatic or sudden loss, whether it's a death at the end of a career, can trigger grief responses from the character. Whatever happens to a character, there can be psychological repercussions if what happened was traumatic. Such repercussions are real. Unlike a system with a well of sanity points, that's like Call of Cthulhu's way of handling this, which can run out and make a character unplayable, we encourage you and your players to recognize and engage with psychological trauma and to see through the consequences of a character's actions or experiences. Having mental consequences doesn't mean you're out of the game. The trick is, when we play out the kinds of horror which require us to pursue very real fears, we must treat the people in real life who experience these things with civility and kindness. The section addresses some ways you can do without harming players or even observers of your game. Before we get started, we wanted to state up front 2 hard rules for portraying characters with psychological problems in any Fate horror game. Yes, Fate's Fraser says, LOL. There's a kitten needing stomping. Yes. I'm going to need some more coffee actually this morning. This coffee cup's getting cold. It's almost gone anyway. Hang on. We're in the middle of a horror discussion. So hang on. I'm going to call for a Yeti hug break and I'm going to pour some more coffee. Just 1 second.
Oh, it's time for a Yeti hug break. Yeti hug break, Yeti hug break. Everybody go hug yo Yeti and show yo Yeti some love.
All right. I'm back. Yeti's in the chat. Yeti, Yeti, Yeti. Yep. All right. Coffee warmed up. Much better. Mental illness does not make people act like cartoonish characters. Players must keep their characters consistent with their aspects and pre-existing beliefs rather than using their psychological issues as an excuse to act without a moral compass or to do crazy things. People with psychological problems are not punchlines. Characters may well find humor in their situation, but it's important that your group only ever laugh with characters rather than at them in respect to their mental health. What about existing mental illnesses? The Fate Accessibility Toolkit is a handbook for playing disabled characters and running games with disabled characters in them. It covers a variety of disabilities, including actual psychological disorders and mental illnesses, and how they might be portrayed within a game. Trauma. Phaser Risk says, to protect their boundaries, LOL. Sad that stipulation needs to be added into a horror RPG. I mean, you should already know that when you're in store for beforehand. Well, hopefully, yeah, you know that you're actually sitting down to a horror game. Sable says, if you're playing a horror game, there's no such thing as safety tools. Truby specifically goes over how horror, the genre, exists so that you feel unsafe. Oh, yeah, we did have horror. Yeah, so this is... This is related to Truby's discussion. James says, this again is an author not getting the point that you don't get to govern other people's tables. They do. So for the purposes of this section, a trauma is a single definable event or series of closely related events that creates overwhelming distress and exceeds a character's ability to cope normally. A trauma aspect is any aspect that's intended to represent a significant, long-lasting effect of trauma on a character's mental well-being. This will also be a moderate, severe, or extreme consequence of an aspect gained while a coping condition, page 41, is checked. A player can choose to treat a situation aspect as a trauma aspect if they understand this will make it last indefinitely. Characters will never really heal from traumas so much as they find ways to cope with them. Whether a character takes a trauma aspect, identify potential triggers and responses Whenever a character takes a trauma aspect, identify potential triggers and responses associated with the aspect. Together, these form a guide as to how the character expresses their reaction to the trauma in everyday life. If a character was in a horrific car accident, they may have an anxiety attack every time they try to drive a car on the highway or in the rain. If they were trapped outside a house with a serial killer trying to break in, they may be afraid of being alone, or they might still get a pang of fear in their gut when they walk past a window with curtains closed. Or maybe they're afraid of the sound of knocking on the door. Players take the time to research genuine mental illnesses when coming up with mental illnesses when coming up with trauma aspects, as this will help you pick triggers and responses that really go together instead of building a genre cliche. It's possible that you'll discover that what you were looking for wasn't what you were expecting. Hey, good morning, Jason. Good morning. Good to see you. Hey, by the way, I meant to mention this when I was looking at this other screen, and I'll mention for Table Talk, by the way. So while everybody's here, well, if I can find the right window. Oh, here it is. If I go over here to, let me remove this. We might have reason to celebrate. It would be awesome if we had a reason to celebrate tonight, which would be 1,000 subscribers. So on the Table Talk channel that's been broken off as its own brand, it would be amazing, guys, if we had 1,000 subscribers tonight on the channel. And then Doug and I will celebrate and have that go in. So if you are sitting here and you are not subscribed to the second channel, the Table Talk channel, I'm going to drop the link in the chat again, because we are at 998 subscribers. So if there are 2 people out there who are watching right now and are not subscribed over to Table Talk, yeah, it would be great if all of a sudden we hit 1,000. So let's see. Phaser Wrist does say so. At least they seem to understand how the wound is supposed to affect the character's everyday life, though. Yes, that's one of the reasons I thought this would be interesting, because it's why this section was interesting, because it seemed to deal with the same things that are dealt with in Stomping Kittens there, and that idea of character creation. So rather than using a clinical name like acute stress disorder, this is for one of your aspects, use an evocative name that guides how the aspect affects the character. Mental illnesses doesn't look the same for one person all the time. Richard's character, Tanvir, was in a car crash that killed his husband. His husband's ghost has been haunting Tanvir in mirrors and windows ever since. Richard researches post-traumatic stress disorder and decides it would be the appropriate basis of a trauma aspect. So he chooses Legacy of Shattered Glass. Using trauma aspects in play, you can invoke or compel trauma aspects when appropriate, usually when one of the triggering conditions you identified with creating the aspect occurs, to complicate a character's life in a way consistent with their psychological state. One technique is to compel a trauma aspect to incite a flashback in which the player reenacts the traumatizing scene from the character's past. Use sparingly, once a session at most. This is an excellent way to instill a scene with drama and character development. Oh, there we go. So TSL Frontman said, I hadn't subscribed to Table Talk. So just one more. Excellent. I knew there was somebody out there who might not have actually subscribed yet. So, all right, TSL is in. So we're at 999. Oh, I got 1K over here. There must have been somebody else too. It just rolled over. Ha ha ha. Excellent. Cool. Thank you, everybody. 1K. So that means maybe I'll have to go get another glass of wine or something for tonight. So we will toast off tonight. In fact, I'm going to text Doug right now. Let him know. Thank you, everybody. So we'll have a party tonight. So that's another thing to celebrate tonight. We'll got the close of the Kickstarter. We got 1,000 subscribers. Things are going well. Okay. Flashback. Okay. Once the session is most. When the ghost punches a mirror to get Tanvir's attention, the GM asks Richard to play out a fraction of that car crash in a flashback spotlight scene. A character can be compelled in other ways as they fail to cope with their trauma, meaning they experience. If you're new to Fate here, compelling somebody, that's actually a game term. If somebody has something on their character sheet that would complicate a situation, the game master can call for a compel. Like if one of your character flaws might be, attracted to shiny objects. Well, if you're playing a thief with that kind of flaw, then when there's like some jewels over there that look like something you could potentially steal, you can play a compel. The game master can actually compel the character to actually attempt to steal the jewels because that's part of the character. Now, the character can refuse and resist using a couple of different techniques, but you're actually rewarded if you complicate the story when you succumb to those things and follow through with a compel. They might instead use a maladaptive coping mechanism like ritualized behavior, avoidance, or hypervigilance. See coping conditions, page 41, for a system that builds on the idea of maladaptive coping. When a character marks a box of mental or physical stress, that's a good time to offer a compel on one of their trauma aspects as the strain of the situation causes the system to take effect. Most importantly, the player and GM should agree on what triggers the system or condition. Tanvir has gun-shy condition that he marked off during a desperate gunfight. Later, when he's in a standoff with a gun-toting cultist and has to mark his second physical stress box, Elsa uses that as a justification for a compel on gun-shy to make him freeze for a moment and let the cultist move unopposed to a tactically advantageous position. Trauma aspects last until the character takes the time to treat them through professional therapy or heart-to-heart conversation with another character. Each game will function differently in how difficult it is to treat trauma aspects, but the idea is to highlight the process of healing and treating mental illness. Players heal their characters' physical wounds by seeing a medic. Why wouldn't characters also see therapists and psychiatrists? Once a trauma aspect has been completely healed, this means the character has learned to use healthy coping mechanisms to deal with their psychological discomfort, which never entirely goes away, which sounds like also they would be dealing with it by overcoming it with their sword in some ways. That'd be the arc. So that one has been resolved. Time to go for another thing for the next story. Healthy coping mechanisms aren't an aspect to be invoked or compelled, but part of how the character acts and behaves. Tanvir eventually lays the ghost of his husband to rest. The literal haunting ends, though he continues to be haunted by the accident. Eventually, after regular visits to a therapist, he learns to cope with his remaining symptoms of PTSD, using mindfulness, exercising regularly, and investing more deeply in his other relationships. Now, a stress box... stress box is also, do we have that's what you use instead of hit points. Do we have an example of a character sheet here? I don't see a character sheet in here, but stress boxes are like your hit points here, except for they don't always have to like your stress boxes absorb different either physical damage that you take or mental damage that you take. And if all you're doing is checking off stress boxes, you basically get to absorb it. And, so it gets around the hit point thing like, oh, I'm losing hit points. Did I actually get cut or did I not? I don't know where I was. If you're just taking stress boxes in Fate, then you're not actually getting hit. You're soaking it up. Once you lose all of your stress boxes, then you actually take consequences for having been hit, which means that something either physical or mentally has happened to you. And that's a part of Fate that I really like. Oh, so coping conditions is where we were. This system uses conditions from Fate Dresden Files Accelerated, page 116, to represent coping conditions, maladaptive coping mechanisms that enable characters to keep functioning in the face of horrible, hostile world, which ultimately make it life more difficult for the character. When a character takes physical or mental stress, their player can check a coping condition to absorb stress in addition to a single stress box and any number of consequences. A fleeting coping condition can absorb two shifts of stress. I'm not as familiar with this that part of that modification to Fate. You can also use PCs to check a coping condition. You can also cause PCs to check a coping condition due to the consequences of a compel or an in-game experience that doesn't inflict stress, such as encountering an eldritch tome. A coping condition is defined the first time it's checked, not written on the character sheet in advance. While a coping condition is checked, the character has a trauma aspect of the same name. While a coping condition is checked, a character has a trauma aspect of the same name. If an opponent causes the condition to be checked, they get a free invoke on the related trauma aspect as normal. Lots on coping conditions. So, for example, how does this work? Elsa is playing a Mythos scholar and marks a sticky flashbacks coping condition on encountering an evil book. She experiences flashbacks of the horrors within the text, hideous images flashing across her mind every time she tries to recall the book's content. Later, when exposure makes Elsa's flashbacks worsen, she upgrades it to a lasting condition as she suffers repeated nightmares featuring the content she's read. This frees up her sticky coping conditions slot for a later use. I'm not exactly sure how that works. Example coping conditions: hypervigilance, obsessive ritual, avoidance, inappropriate emotion. Let's look at this section, and then let's look at this section here. The horror of viscera and gore. A common source of emotional and mental distress for characters in horror fiction is exposure to bodily harm or its gory aftermath. You can use these as a seasoning in your game to introduce instinctual reactions of repulsion and revulsion in both players and their characters. This shared reaction can help the players identify with their character's situation and heighten other aspects of horror, for example, a sense of helplessness. In this section, we provide tools and advice for using visceral and splatter horror in your games as a source of psychological trauma for the characters. Like any seasoning, use visceral horror sparingly. Repeated use numbs its impact. Lovecraftian horror. While this section is aimed squarely at emulating gore and splatter horror, its systems also work well for representing the disturbing and unsettling nature of encounters with the eldritch and uncanny, which are the hallmarks of Lovecraftian horror. Rather than gore, encounters with mind-boggling architecture and things that should not be. When describing viscera, open and close your descriptions with senses other than sight to heighten the sense of wrongness and discomfort. Open with a taste of rot in the air or a smell of pustulous blight. End with the squishing sound of something moving or settling, or the feel of something unexpectedly wet or dry under a character's foot or hand. Viscera serves as a practical purpose as well by providing evidence of something off-screen. This allows you to retain mystery by keeping a threat out of view while experiencing the current action and its aftermath. Gory remnants of an attack provide clues about how a monster works, such as how it kills its victims or whether it behaves in certain ways during or after an attack. Such remnants can also build tension by imitating a future threat, demonstrating the power of something that must be confronted or escaped soon, or revealing some of its capabilities. Splatter horror overturns the normal limitations of viscera by turning the gore up to an 11. Depictions of violence are often frequent, extreme, and fast-paced, resulting in an exaggerated sense of suffering. When you're running a splatter horror game, use the same advice and mechanics, but delay any viscera-related compels until after the dust settles and events have had a chance to sink in. Visceral aspect compels. Viscera is normally the basis for compels as soon as the character encounters it. as their instincts override their highest reasoning and they make bad decisions. As a result, their players temporarily lose their narrative control as well. Usually you'll compel a situation or monster aspect representing the gore itself. But in some subgenres, tying the compel back to a character aspect may be more impactful. For example, in Richard's survival horror game, the PCs stumble into the aftermath of a zombie attack. Richard passes out a fate point to each player with the compel. The brutal and body corpse carnage turns your stomachs. So that's what's so this is a compel here. So everybody's getting a fate point for that. You spend several minutes throwing up and regaining your composure, which was very much a bad idea. By the time you've recovered yourselves, you realize that several of the corpses have risen to their feet and are almost on top of you. So that alone, several minutes throwing up and regaining your composure, that's not anything that's going to impact the game alone. Like, that might not impact the game. So you wouldn't get some kind of fate point for just saying, okay, you spend several minutes throwing up and regaining your composure, unless the time, which we've said often here, time is not used in RPGs as often as it should be. So if the time doesn't matter, that doesn't matter. But it does matter here, because what happens, it allows you to not notice that some zombies are rising and are about to attack you. That's consequential in the game. Have I changed the morning grind time schedule? No. I wasn't here yesterday. I put that in the Discord server because I had a meeting I had to prepare for, and I had to get some stuff done. But otherwise, we're the same. I'm still thinking about not hosting it on Saturdays, and that might be what happens. But at the moment, no. In Elsa's nihilistic horror game, the investigators have discovered the imprisoned result of the cult's experiments. She compels one of the investigators. Because you're a secluded scholar, you're overcome with shock and disgust and scream in fright when one of the prisoners rolls over and stares at you. This goes wrong when you hear heavy feet treading on the stairs down to your level. So yes, okay, so in this case, secluded scholar is an aspect of one of the characters. So if you're a secluded scholar, that could benefit you in some cases, and that could harm you in some cases, or provide a complication to the story in some cases. And so in this case, it's providing a complication. So that's why it's compelled. Decision-based compels driven by viscera are a great way to set up classic horror situations, like a character fleeing the scene or ending up alone with someone dangerous nearby, fleeing the scene and leaving something behind or someone important, screaming and attracting unwanted attention, ruining their tough facade in front of someone they want to impress, abandoning a carefully prepared ambush and frantically attacking. Viscera can also be used for event-based compels. These draw on the exact circumstances more than decision-based compels, but some examples include characters being so distracted that they miss an ambush, being mistaken as the cause of gore by another party, slipping in the gore and getting thoroughly covered in it, incorrectly identifying the victim because they can't bring themselves to look carefully. The mental toll of gore. Characters often want to come away from viscera-splattered scenes with something they can use as an advantage later. In horror genres with powerful monsters, these scenes offer a great opportunity to build up advantages and free invokes, because they can be used in a later confrontation, but not without a cost to their mental well-being. Rather than using compels to reflect the traumatizing experiences of scenes like this, make the gore a character in the scene and have it act directly on the characters as they investigate in a contest or conflict. Give the visceral mess a gore rating and roll attacks with every exchange. So it says make it a character. Give everything. That's part of the fate fractal. Everything can be a character, or you can set it up like one. So this is interesting that it's actually taking action here. Rather than using compels to reflect the traumatizing experience in scenes like this, make the gore a character in the scene and have it act directly on the characters as they investigate in a contest or conflict. Phaserist says, this seems much less action and more reaction. Not really down my alley for gaming. I'm more of the kick in the door and rush in screaming Leroy Jenkins kind of player. It's always fun to think about Leroy Jenkins. That was a classic time in both gaming and the internet. So give the visceral mess a gore rating and attack rolls with every exchange defended by will or careful. A gore rating at or slightly below the group's average will rating means that characters must be cautious since the GM has a stock of fate points per scene they can use to boost their attacks. Depending on the circumstances, the gore can roll against a single character, divide its shifts among everyone, or for an especially challenging scene, attack everyone with its full roll. Make the scenes brisk, with characters creating some advantages against the threat, taking some stress and maybe a consequence, and then getting out. To change things up a bit, you could transition to a fight or chase after an exchange or two. So Bruce's players have found some bodies half dissolved in some malignant but dormant fungus. He's about to compel them to flee the scene when Marissa suggests this is a great opportunity to learn more about the source of the fungus. After rolling to create several advantages to analyze samples of the fungus, Bruce rolls on the scene's gore of good +3. That gore of good gore. Defended by Marissa's character's fair will and Nick's average will. Marissa is fine, but Nick's character takes a 3-shift hit. He marks a stress box and takes a mild consequence of unmoored from reality. Next exchange, Nick looks at his treacherous dice and declares that he's conceding before Bruce rolls. Marissa's PC shrugs off the hit again, and Bruce and Nick decide the fungus has begun to wake up, and he's passed out from inhaling spores. It really was. I remember people thinking it wasn't staged. What an incredible moment in internet history. I was thinking about the guild also yesterday. Same kind of general thing. Classic parts of the internet history, especially in geekdom. Let's see. I've got stuff I got to do today because I got to talk. Okay, so let's finish this page then with splatter attacks because I've got the table talk tonight, but then Brianna and I are working all afternoon, and I got to prepare other things before we start working. So splatter attacks. Monster stunts are another effective way to bring viscera into play, especially in a splatter horror game. When triggered, these stunts let the monster create an advantage representing disgust or revulsion, or make a provoke attack against all witnesses. Triggers might include when a monster's target attacks a consequence, when the monster's target takes a consequence, when the monster succeeds with style, when a disgusting monster first comes into clear view, when you first smell the monster's stench, when a monster is discovered in an unexpected place, like hanging from a ceiling or moving through a pipe that should be too small for it. These stunts are powerful and should be limited, usable once per scene, requiring a fate point or requiring an invoke of a suitable situation aspect. So, for instance, Chainsaw Flourish. When the Appalachian Stalker succeeds with style in an attack with his chainsaw, the GM can spend a fate point to roll a provoke attack against anyone in the original target's zone. Hardened hearts. Sometimes it doesn't make sense for a character to be bothered by viscera. In some subgenres of horror, especially survival or splatter horror, this works without further complication. Give your character an aspect like expert surgeon or combat veteran, justifying why they can shrug off a bloody mess in a room strewn with internal organs. Since aspects are always true, you can use such an aspect to argue that a viscera-based compel is inappropriate, and you'll always have something to invoke when defending against viscera-based attacks. In other genres, especially those focusing on psychological horror, this kind of hardening comes at a cost. One way to handle this is with a stunt that exchanges your internal cost for an external cost. Instead of getting grossed out, everyone is disturbed by your indifference. So, for instance, inured. You've got a strategy for coping with viscera and gore, but it's not comfortable for others. You have a sticky condition, Dresden File Accelerated, page 16, disturbingly cautious, that you can check at any time. While it's checked, you're immune to gore-based mental attacks and can't have visceral aspects compelled against you. But you also can't use it to defend against your empathy skill. To clear disturbingly callous, you must demonstrate it. You must demonstrate that you are vulnerable and human after all. For example, by making an emotional appeal in a safe place or by putting yourself in danger to your allies. Anyone without disturbingly cautious checked adds 1 to the shift value of every gore attack they receive if they're in the same zone as someone with the condition checked. So anyone without this checked adds 1 to the shift value if they're in the same zone as someone who does have it checked. So, for instance, they are demonstrating disturbingly callous to what's going on. Well, I think we'll have to look at this some more. I think there's more stuff to say in here about this. Let me take that down. So, we're celebrating because we did just hit, if you're just coming in, we just hit 1,000 subscribers on the other channel. We got 1,000 subscribers on Table Talk, and that is where our discussion of Fight Club is going to take place tonight. I would love to see you for the discussion of Fight Club. And also, I would really love it if you would consider backing the Trial of St. Gabriel Kickstarter campaign, only for $4. Where is, oh, here it is. The Trial of St. Gabriel is, we got 9 hours left. The ebook's only $4, though I also have print books coming in. I'm really excited about this one because this is the first one, even though it's not in the overall angelic world, it is that I'm building. It is the first Christmas story that I've gotten out, and it's definitely warrior angel themed. Tells the Christmas story from the perspective of warrior angels, and it addresses things in the Christmas story like the Massacre of the Innocents. So that, well, come to think of it, some horror some horror components right there that we were just talking about. What is it like to be in the Massacre of the Innocents? Why did it happen? This book addresses, or the story addresses, the short story, it addresses themes of free will, prophecy, obedience to God's will. Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? And even has the character from the story of Job, where the angel is tormenting Job. I brought him into the Christmas story. You don't often see him in the Christmas story either. So I would love to have you. I just put the link to Trial of St. Gabriel Kickstarter there. So, all right, I got like a couple hours before I meet with Brianna. So I got things to do, things to clean up. Thank you so much for being here today. Go get work done this afternoon. Then I will see everybody tonight for Doug and my discussion on Fight Club. Thank you, everybody who's been here. Please do hit the like button. And thank you to everybody who also watches on replay. Catch everybody later. Bye.